Welcome to Cashflow Podcasting, where business owners reveal how their podcasts have supercharged their success. My podcast completely transformed my training business, so I've seen firsthand the magic that podcasts can work. And here's the best part. You don't need millions of downloads to boost your business's revenue and impact. Let our guests show you how. And welcome.
Thanks, Pete.
I'm super excited to hear your wisdom on Cashflow Podcasting. We tend to chat with individual business owners and hear their perspective with podcasting, how that's worked for them. And you've got a cool perspective because you have spoken to many business owners about their podcasts. Could you maybe share with us, do you have any idea, if we had to take a stab at guesstimating, how many total business podcasts have you coached and or audited during your reign?
Ooh, that's a few. Quite a few.
Yeah. Well, I think we're in the dozens.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, probably over 100.
Okay, like
Pretty
more than
sure.
8 dozen.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, so that's so fun. It's like you have a wealth of knowledge and expertise and experience here. So I'd love to start broad, if we could, in terms of you and I are believers that podcasts can be a helpful long-term asset for businesses. Maybe we'll just start super broad and say, why is that? How does that work in practice?
I think podcasting is quite a unique marketing tool for business owners because it's your voice, right? So people can hear you. If you have video, they can see you. It's long form content. And all of that together is just a great trust builder. I think in that way, podcasting is so unique over social media, short form content, written content. There's so many different ways to express your thoughts and experience and your expertise. But I think podcasting is it's really cool because people can actually listen to you and they can feel, because they're listening to you and maybe even, they even see your face, they feel like they get to know you a little bit better with every episode. Yeah. And that's just really cool.
It is. I'm thinking about, I think the first podcaster that I had listened to at length and then met in person was Pat Flynn. And I've enjoyed his show for quite a long time. And then I saw him and I was like, whoa. And it's like, I don't know, I was sort of nervous. Like, this is a celebrity. It's like, what do I say? What do I not say? It's like, you're Pat Flynn. It's like, oh, he knows that he's Pat Flynn. and yet it was super cool. And he said it well. He said that people will say to him all the time, I feel like I know you. I think it was Pat who said this. And he said, you do, but I don't know you. And so, and that's the honest reality of, I guess, this parasocial situation. And then, getting to chat with him and to know him better, it was super cool. And it speaks volumes that, hey, it was a trust builder for me. I've bought plenty of stuff from him
Yeah.
over the years.
Exactly. And it's also like, it's not just you who feels like, who thinks he knows, or like who does know Pat Flynn, but it's like building trust at scale, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone who's listening to your podcast, especially when it's several episodes and when they listen throughout the whole episode, that really builds a relationship without you even knowing it. Like, you just create one episode, well, ideally a few episodes, but then hundreds, thousands of people can listen to that. And you're building trust with all of those people all at once.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's well said. So the trust building is huge, and many, dare I say most, businesses benefit from lots of additional people trusting them. That's fair to say?
For sure, yeah. Even if it's just brand awareness. Like, every business wants brand awareness, and everyone, especially every business, wants to be liked.
Certainly. And so I was thinking then, which businesses then, given this, are most poised to benefit from having podcasts, and which ones might see minimal benefit from having podcasts?
The biggest impact will be when you have a high ticket offer. Okay. If you sell coaching services, or we have a lot of financial advisors that we work with, one new client is worth a lot for these businesses. And in that case, it's relatively easy to make a podcast profitable. If you sell a $10 ebook, on the other hand, you need to sell a lot of $10 ebooks to make your podcast profitable and kind of like worth the energy, time, monetary investment. But if you sell a service that is, I don't know, a higher ticket, then even one client can have that effect on your business. So then in that case, if you then build trust at scale, that's just a really good win. It's a great marketing tool for those businesses. And it's also more important, of course, before someone's going to pay a few $1,000s, they probably want to know who you are and what you do. And when it's a lower ticket item, it's just less important.
Yeah, that tracks really well. And in fact, we even had Caleb on the show say exactly that. We get, one business client a year pays for the service. So, and we're getting way more than that. And then there's lots of sort of intangibles on top of that. So certainly trust building, high ticket, and those things tend to go together in terms of you're less likely to want to spend a lot of money with somebody that you don't trust. And I would say as well, as at coaches, financial advisors, something in the zone of expertise seems to really shine for businesses having podcasts, as well as I would say some differentiatedness. If someone had a strictly commodity offer in which folks are just going to get the lowest price thing there is, and there's not much room for differentiation. I'm thinking about if you have just sort of like a very basic agricultural product, like you are farming soybeans or corn. And we got Brian with Farmland Stocks, who is doing agricultural related podcast. But if you have something, maybe it's a government contracting situation where it doesn't matter how much the buyer likes or trusts you. It's just sort of like, this is the rigid procurement process by which we follow to buy stuff. Then that's probably not going to do a whole lot for you. Or am I thinking about it wrong? What are your thoughts, Anne?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think in that case, it is less important. But even then, I think a podcast could be worth it, but it would be more maybe a personal brand that someone could start a podcast for, because that's still really important for people who are very career oriented. So there's a lot of different ways that podcasts can work for businesses, for your career as a professional. But we mostly work with coaches and financial advisors because it's just that huge impact. Like I said, if you have to sell a $10 ebook a million times, then you need a huge audience, which is not impossible at all, but it just takes a lot longer. So it takes a lot of upfront investment in time, money, energy before you get there, before it's really worth it. Or if you want to start more of an influencer brand where the podcast is the thing that you want to sell, also absolutely not impossible, but it's usually not who we work with because it just takes a while. And our clients, they want that quicker win maybe also, but also that positive return on investment is so important because they are business owners in the end.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. And it's a hard game if your show is more entertainment-y, which is sort of tricky because from a consumer perspective, I think a lot of consumers assume, a podcast, like I tell people, oh, you're a podcaster. And they think that podcasters make money via advertisements. And that is true of the largest podcasts because that becomes economically pretty easy in terms of they don't need to think of an offer, that people just show up and they want to sell a better help or athletic greens or kind of whatever the thing may be. And that's hard because you have to have a huge audience. But if what you're trafficking in is, say, true crime or comedy, then that tends to work pretty well. But none of our clients are true crime or comedy, and most of them have way smaller audiences than the top names that folks have heard of in podcasting, and yet they're still plenty profitable with investing in doing the podcast.
Absolutely. I mean, for our clients, even if 10 people listen, if one or two of those people are interested to work with them, cool, it's worth it. So they also don't need those millions of listeners. It's just they need the right people to listen, and then the correct type of content to serve those people. Okay, this is what we offer. This is why you should work with us. And then also the next step.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about our client, Casey Garrett, with microdosing for healing. And as we talk about what makes an ideal setup for a podcast and business to be successful, it really tracks that, it makes sense that she said about half of her clients have come through the podcast, because that's an environment where, wow, trust is quite important. In terms of, you don't want the wrong person giving you the wrong microdosing advice. That could be a very serious problem.
Yes.
You absolutely want to have tremendous trust in that person. And then when you hear Casey talk to all of the luminaries in the field and then share her own smart thoughts along the way, I mean, if you have any interest in that domain whatsoever, I think you walk away thinking, okay, wow, Casey really knows her stuff. She has offers, programs for people who want to know this stuff. Seems like if I want to know this stuff, this would be a fine thing to just go ahead and purchase.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we did with Casey, which I think worked really well for her, is that we made sure that the podcast is everywhere in her business and her business is everywhere in her podcast. So we made sure it's really connected, and we built one ecosystem of podcast and business and her offers, so that it's not, okay, podcast on one side, business on the other side, and then sometimes we mention a business. No, it's all about the same thing. It's all about her microdosing offers. And like you said, she interviews guests, but she makes sure to also add her own experience and her own thoughts on the subject matter, so that she is also seen as the expert, even though it's an interview podcast. So she's been really strategic about that. And we talked about that a lot before starting a podcast, like especially an interview podcast. You want to make sure that you're not just a reporter asking the questions and then that's it. Because then, I mean, you want also the guest to be the star of the show, but you also want to make sure, if it is a business podcast, that you're seen as the expert as well on your own expertise. So I think it is super important to be very strategic in that way. And that's what we did with Casey, and it worked really well for her.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot. And with regard to the offers, I think it's fair to say, in my own experience and that of the many podcasts that have come and gone, if your goal is financially oriented or business related with the podcast, because some people just want to make art. They just want to talk to people about stuff they think is cool. And hey, more power to them. I think that's a beautiful thing in the world that is now possible. But if folks do have an eye towards the financial angle of the podcast, my impression is you're vastly more likely to see a financial return if you already have successful offers. You know, people buy it and they like it and they tell their friends about it currently in your business life, and then adding a podcast onto it, as opposed to the opposite. I'm going to try to build up an audience and then figure out what they want and make it and sell it to them. I think the first path is vastly more probable to result in financial success. What are your thoughts there?
You'll definitely see faster results. We've had some clients in the past who used the podcast as more of a market research tool, which it's a great tool for it, because you can literally see the numbers. Okay, this is what my audience is interested in. This is what they listen to. This is how long they listen. You get a lot of data actually that you can use for market research. And it also gives you an opportunity to talk to people who would maybe otherwise not talk to you, because you have that podcast, right? You can ask people on as a guest. So that's a really powerful tool for that as well. But in terms of monetary results, I mean, yes, the financial results are much, much quicker if you have an offer, if you already know it works. And if you do know it works and like you already have clients, you can also ask maybe some previous clients on the podcast, share some case studies that way. That content is so powerful. It converts really well, and it shows people, okay, well, this person worked with the host of the podcast. They had amazing results. Okay, cool. And they also, for the guest who they have on, then they hear their voice, see their face, really hear their story in long form content. So maybe in like 30 minutes, maybe 60 minutes of, okay, how was it to work with this person? I mean, that content is just gold for business owners.
Absolutely. And I think you and I have both had the experience where we are being sold something and we think, oh, this is kind of interesting. Could I chat with some of your previous clients just to kind of hear what their experience is like? And I don't know about you, but my experience with that has been like, oh yeah, I think I could probably maybe find someone for you. Let me reach out to them and make sure that's okay with them and then get their info. And then maybe you successfully connect with that person and maybe you don't. But then if you have it just ready to go, it's like, oh yeah, I could find someone for you to talk to. Or you could just listen to these 3 audios or watch these 3 videos right away and get a feel for that. It's like, oh, well, that's actually much easier. And I could do that on my own time without have to schedule anything or hunting anybody down. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. So trust building at scale, that's really cool. Market research, that's nifty. I'm also interested in how folks sometimes use podcasts with a view that it might not necessarily be about the listener becoming a customer, but rather the guest becomes a customer or partner or referral affiliate, some kind of a other relationship building goodness. Can you tell us how this unfolds in practice?
Yes, for sure. So the cool thing about a podcast is you have this great reason to talk to people. So you can just reach out to really smart people in your industry and say like, hey, I have this podcast. I would love to have you on as a guest and share your knowledge with my audience. Also, just know that the cool thing about podcasts is that no one really can see how big that audience is unless they ask and you tell them. But it's not like YouTube where you can see, oh, this many views. Like for podcasts, people don't know. So even if you have a small audience, you still have that credibility of having a podcast. So you can just reach out to really smart people and say, hey, I would love to have you on. They come on the podcast, you have a longer conversation with them. It's such a good way in to have that conversation in the first place and then keep in touch. You obviously share it with your audience. You can ask, hey, would you share this with your audience as well? So you grow your audience that way. I mean, that's just so cool. I mean, what other way would you have to be able to have a longer conversation with someone who's just really, a thought leader in your space? That's usually quite difficult to get them on the phone and have, maybe even a 1-hour conversation with them. But when you have a podcast, you can just ask, and usually it's a win for them. When it looks really professional, your podcast, then why would they say no? So yeah, that's just a really cool thing, a really cool win. And then after that longer conversation, they know you, they know what you do. Usually you also chat a little bit before and after the interview that you have. So it's a great relationship builder.
It is, and I've been amazed, as have many other podcasters, they ask people to be guests, and maybe they have the thought, oh, there's no way that person will say yes. And then, oh my gosh, wow, they did it. And it's sort of like they're minor celebrities. And I remember this in my early days of podcasting. I'd tell my wife, it's like, oh my gosh, David Allen's going to be on the show. And she's like, I'm glad you're excited, honey, but who is David Allen? I was like, he wrote the book, Getting Things Done. This is like the guy. And so we're all jazzed. We're all super excited about this get. And yet, for us, it's I hope the magic never leaves, Anne, but it's just commonplace and to be expected that when you invite folks onto your podcast, even if it's tiny, the response rates are phenomenally good. And this was my own case even in the earliest days of my podcast. I think David Allen was episode 15-ish. I did not have a big name, a big brand, a big following. And so that still happened. And then it's been the case with all sorts of things, because I think sometimes, even if folks wonder about the PR value, it's still, I think relatively few people do a rigorous calculation associated with, like, almost nobody asked, how big is your audience? But occasionally they did. And even if I told them, hey, it's kind of small right now, here it is, they would still do it. And there's all sorts of benefits associated with, one, that creates content that they can repurpose any number of places, which is just handy. 2, it helps them sharpen their own thoughts about a topic, or it could be practice. It's like, okay, well, I would have practiced with you before I got into the big shows, the big media pieces. Or it's just fun and interesting for them because it's relatively rare that anybody cares about what they're doing to talk about that in this level of depth. It's like my wife and kids don't want to hear me yammer about this for an hour, but you do. Oh, that sounds like a fun opportunity for me. These don't really come up. So I think there are all kinds of reasons why people say yes. And then once they do, I mean, it's pretty awesome for that relationship because you've been chatting for an extended period of time about a subject they care about. And then away you go. And then often there's interesting conversations that happen after the record button's turned off. Like, so what's your deal? What are you up to? How did you get started? What's your goal? Why do you like this industry? And then I'll be emailing back and forth with these big deal authors like, oh my gosh, it's like we're just pals now.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, even though like maybe this was episode 15, but look at your podcast now, right? You're getting millions of downloads. So that podcast episode is probably still out there, right? And there's evergreen content. So this person went on your show when it was not huge, but now, I mean, and people listen to previous episodes. So, years later, maybe thousands of new listeners still come into that episode. It's absolutely possible. So for this person, it takes maybe an hour of their time to come on your show, record an episode, and it's out there forever usually. Mm-hmm. So it's even if your audience is small now, it's still a pretty good deal for them.
Oh, absolutely. Well, so we're all saying podcasts are so great. They're so great. They're so great. So, Anne, tell me, if they're so wonderful, why doesn't every business just have one?
It takes time and commitment and energy to do it. As with many things, consistency is key. It's a bit of a cliche, but I think for podcasting, it is true. When you start a podcast and you already have your offer, you already have some previous clients, it's been proven that it works, in that ideal situation, you start a podcast and you might see some new people coming into your business, but then at some point you get busy, you have a few new clients, but you feel like, okay, we're kind of stagnating now. That's when a lot of podcasters stop because it's not the new thing anymore. It's kind of the same, starting to record new episodes every week or every month or however you do it. And then there's this shiny new thing that comes along, whatever it is at YouTube, is it TikTok, it doesn't matter. If you keep going then, if you can actually keep a consistent release schedule, that's when a true magic happens. That's when you see that audience growth. And audience growth it's not linear, right? You can do the thing for years and not see a huge audience growth. And then at some point, something changes, whatever that something is. And then it just takes off. Happens all the time. So the really, really difficult part is to commit to the podcast and to keep going and keep tweaking it, keep listening to your audience, keep looking for ways to improve it, and serve that audience better and better, and also make sure that it works really well with your offers so that you can then also help your audience even more after they listen to the podcast by working with them.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Okay, so it takes effort, and that's a thing, and then consistency. Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen it that it's really fun in terms of like the finer points of podcasting for business, that it seems like if your goal is, in fact, yes, to grow an ever larger audience, then more episodes over more time is a fundamental just requirement of making that happen. And that just sort of seems to be the nature of most platforms in general, like to grow an audience on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or anywhere. That's kind of the name of the game. On the flip side, though, I think about Scott Barlow of Happen Your Career. He's got his main podcast, but he also has lots of little sub-podcasts, which are kind of fun in that it was designed from day one not to go forever, but to be sort of an arc, a season, to get us from point A to point B. And so for a particular segment of prospect, they say, hey, go listen to these 8 things. And then they come out the other side thinking, oh, wow, that's really cool. I'd like to buy your services. So I think that's pretty handy there, is that it might be, if that's the goal, is to build a great long-term audience, then yes, the consistency is key. And on the flip side, if the goal is to have more of a take me from point A to point B in my education, customer nurturing journey, then that could be accomplished with a sort of a short defined set of episodes or content along the way. And I think where people get into trouble is when they kind of cross those wires or get mixed up. We say, we're going to have new episodes every Thursday morning. And then they don't. It's like, okay, well, maybe under promise at first if you're not sure about that.
There goes your trust, right? If you say you're going to do something and you don't, then your audience is like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of a disappointment, right? So then it's better to not overpromise, like you said. I think it's better to underpromise and overdeliver, and do like bonus episodes, right? Like if you have If you're not sure if weekly episodes are possible, do an episode every other week. And then once there is something exciting, you do a bonus episode. Cool. But then if you don't make it, also fine, because you still hit that release schedule that you actually promised people.
Certainly. Or you tell them, hey, this is our first season and we're going to have this many episodes, and that's the game plan. And so they understand. And so I think it really requires some of the strategic thought, which is what you do so wonderfully with your coaching sessions with clients and prospects, is what really is the goal that we're trying to achieve here, and then what really are we able to bite off and handle and commit to, and then to sort of act accordingly in terms of what we're building out. Because if the goal is a regular listener habit to be built, well, yeah, that requires some of that. And I think we see it with television too, is like we can enjoy and appreciate a season of something dropping, and then we'll binge it, and then we are hopefully enriched or entertained or in some way. And then when the next season comes around, it's like, well, you may or may not engage with it. But if it's a regularly recurring program, I think like the news, like, oh, I always watch the evening news or kind of whatever, then indeed you're more likely to have a regular habit that gets built into the fabric of people's normal recurring days and weeks.
Exactly. Yeah, it all depends on the goals, 100%. And it just requires planning, right? Because if you have a new episode drop every week, doesn't mean that you have to record a new episode every week. You can record once a month. You record all those episodes and that's it. Or even once per quarter. We have clients who record once per quarter, upload all those episodes, and then our team just goes ahead, produces them, schedules them out, and that's that. So that's absolutely possible. It just requires planning.
Yeah. I think it might have been Michael Hyatt or someone blew my mind. I think he had a schedule where it's like, oh, well, in 1 week I do all my interviews for the year. Year. And so I don't know if he's monthly or twice a month, but you imagine like 24 episodes. Like, okay, well, hey, I got 1 week where I'm going to schedule 24 interviews, and then I'm set. That's the year.
Yeah.
Like, and then you don't even need to think about it because you've got, good teams and processes and systems just going from there. And I think that's very cool.
Yeah, you can make it easy on yourself for sure.
Mm-hmm. So, Anna, you've done many audits and podcasts. Tell us, what are some recurring mistakes you see people make that we'd best avoid?
It's really difficult to be specific, especially when you know who you're talking to. It's really difficult to make that super, super clear for someone who's never seen a podcast before. So in many of the audits that I do, many of the new clients that I speak to, first things we talk through is who's the target audience, as specific as you can be, and then what's the central message to that target audience. And that's actually a really difficult question very often because they know what they do, they know then sometimes also who they speak to, but then what do you want that person to walk away with after listening to any episode? Shouldn't matter what the episode is, but what's the thing that you want them to know after listening to your podcast? And ideally, that ties into your offer. Mm-hmm. So it's very strategic. It's a difficult question. So there usually a lot of brainstorming goes into that. But I think that is what can make or break a podcast for businesses. Because if you don't do that, then it's not clear enough. And then it won't work because maybe not the right people will listen. Maybe people won't listen because they don't know it's for them, or they're not getting the correct message after listening to your episodes, and then nothing happens after that. So maybe then you have listeners, but not new clients.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And I've talked to a number of prospective podcasters, and if their concept for the show is, I talk to awesome people about awesome stuff that I'm interested in, like food and fashion and fitness and interior design and spirituality. Yeah. It's like, ooh, like that only works if you're already a celebrity and people already love you. In terms of like, I just want to know everything Ann thinks about everything. All right, well, hey, welcome to the Ann Show. Yeah. I'm going to give you exactly that. If you're trying to build from zero or little, that's probably not going to work out unless your personality is just amazingly hilarious, or you have some tremendous asset working for you there. Because the people who are interested in food will probably listen to food podcasts. Those who are interested in fitness will find their fitness podcasts. And even if someone happens to be interested in all of these things, they're probably going to find multiple individual podcasts to fit them. And almost no one is going to be interested in all of those things and say, oh, jackpot. This is exactly the show I've been looking for, which happens to cover each of these topics that I'm into and just the way I want them covered. It seems like a recipe that is likely to fail, in my view there.
Yeah, and even if you have that hilarious personality, I think we both are hilarious, Pete, but I still think we should probably not make the Pete show and the Ann show, because in the end, the cold harsh truth is no one cares about you as the host. Yeah. Even like when you're a business owner, no one really cares about you. They care about what they walk away with after listening to the podcast. And ideally, that is something that takes them from A to B, or that gives them an insight, a new idea. That's what you want to focus on, because they don't know you yet, right? When it's a new audience, when you're growing an audience, they don't know you, they don't care about you. Everyone just cares about themselves. That's just how it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's, you're dropping truth bombs here. And I think that's very well said. In a business context, I think that's 100% accurate. And the podcast we work with, in terms of, I've come here for some sort of wisdom, knowledge, value. I have not come here for companionship, at least at first. And other podcasts, they do have that vibe. And so that can go down that route. But yes, in terms of if we're thinking about businesses and business results, I think what you're saying is absolutely resonant. And could you maybe give us an example then of podcast audience, central message, offer that just are beautifully aligned versus, and we can be a little bit anonymous if you don't want to embarrass anybody, but some mismatches that you've heard? Like, you might think you've thought through this sufficiently, but here's an example of something that's not quite aligned, and how, Ann and some coaching can really help get it into that better place.
Absolutely. Okay, I'll start with the non-aligned one, and then I'll talk about how that could be more aligned. We've worked with a client who had a podcast for a different target audience than her offers were for. So the audience for her podcast was a lot younger, and they wouldn't be able to afford or benefit from her services. So we had multiple conversations with this client to try to figure out how can we bridge that gap. Should she create new services or new offers for that younger audience? Should she maybe change the podcast topic slightly, or at least the target audience slightly, so that it aligns better with her offers? And that second option was my advice to her. You get the best results when your offers, your podcast, your whole marketing machine, when it all has the same message to the same people. And it might feel a little bit boring for you as a business owner, but not everyone in your audience, but most people in your audience will probably not listen to the podcast, read all your emails, see all your LinkedIn posts, see all your Instagram posts. Usually they see snippets of it. They see, even if they do follow you on several channels, they usually don't open all the emails. They don't listen to all the podcast episodes. So it's really important to have that consistency. So that's what we work on with our clients, to see that the whole picture makes sense.
Oh, I think that is such a fabulous insight right there, in terms of what you see as the business owner versus what the consumer sees. It can feel totally different. I'm thinking about Kwame Christian, American Negotiation Institute. He is a LinkedIn top voice, which is cool. Great job, Kwame. And he has also got a podcast, Negotiate Anything, which is great. He's been on my show and vice versa. And he had a survey on his LinkedIn about, hey, what content would you like to see for the podcast? And he had what he thought was like a joke option on the poll, which was, I didn't know you had a podcast, because he thought like, ha, 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 I talk about it nonstop, so I don't know how you could not know I have a podcast. And he was shocked, startled to see, I don't remember the exact number, but a very substantial segment of his LinkedIn audience, whom he's talking about his podcast all the time, was unaware that he had a podcast, and he was dumbfounded. And so I think that is so true. And likewise, if sometimes I think, oh, do I need another show about public speaking and how to be also make a podcast? We've covered that several times, over 1,000 episodes. And yet, when it's distributed over months of time, and people have their busy days, their busy lives. They are consuming much more content than your one thing. By far, it feels more fresh and new to them than it does to me. And I see it in the stats, in the figures. And so I've had that thought a number of times, like, oh, I don't know if there's anything new or fresh or worthwhile. And then I'm seeing high engagement numbers and people are digging it. It's like, oh, okay, then I will just continue doing what the people want.
Exactly. And I think it's really smart to also look at those numbers and see what the people want and then give them more of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And there could be, you mentioned market research, that can be it can be rather surprising. Because I think, for example, I love creativity and problem solving, as I think that's just so cool and fun, and a great topic that could be so transformational for people's careers. And yet, when I look at the numbers for How to Be Awesome at Your Job, those episodes do not as well as like speaking, public confidence, gravitas, those kinds of things. And so it's like, all right, then. So there we have it. And so then I'm selective. I still can't completely divorce the creativity problem solving stuff, because like we must have a little bit, but we'll just be more selective and have them more rarely. And it's eye opening, the disconnects that could pop up. It could ultimately help redirect you and your business in really great ways.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. That's also why we have those meetings with clients to look at their metrics and see, okay, what does this tell us? Because a lot of business owners, they're busy running their business. They don't have time, or they don't think about, okay, let's look into these podcast numbers. So we often have a call with clients, maybe once a month, maybe once a quarter, every now and then, just to check in, okay, what's working for the podcast? What's not working? What should we do more of? What should we do less of?
Mm-hmm. That's super. Well, so then can we hear an example of what great alignment sounds like? This is the podcast, this is the audience, this is the message, this is the offer.
Andrew Udarian came on the podcast previously. He's been a client for, I don't even know how long, way before I came to work for Cashflow Podcasting, but I think it must be 8 years, 9 years, maybe 10 years even. So that's wild.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so our show is called E-Commerce Fuel. And so then we've got that clarity right there in terms of, okay, this is what we're talking about. E-commerce is the thing. And then the audience are mostly e-commerce business owners. Like, okay, so you've got a brand, that's you're selling stuff on the internet, the host of issues that ensues with the fulfillment and the pricing and the marketing and Amazon.com and how do we like them? Do we not like them? How do we play with them or not? So we've got those sorts of issues the audience is facing. And then the offer is he's got a few, but his community seems like dead on in terms of, hey, fellow e-commerce owners, here we can get together and share best practices, war stories, insider info to flourish, in this industry. And it seems like just a killer offer in terms of like all these tools people would have no idea about existing, missteps avoided. I think he promises like a 10 times return on your investment within the year, or like, it's like, okay, that's hard to beat. And then what's the message then? How that fits in with the other three pieces?
I would say his message is probably, it is possible to have a profitable e-commerce business. That insight of, okay, it is possible. Like all these people are doing it in so many different ways. There is this whole community, like you don't have to do it alone. So it must be possible for me too. I think that like inspirational piece, that's, I think, the insight that he provides with his podcast.
Mm-hmm. And you're good at this. What's my message?
I mean,
help me out, Ann. Cool. All right. Well, Ann, tell me any other things you want to make sure to mention or we forgot to say when it comes to businesses and podcasts and how they go together?
If you're listening to this, you're thinking about, okay, should I start a podcast, or maybe you already just started it and you're trying to figure out what works. I think it's also really good to keep in mind that you can make all the changes to this podcast. So even if you started it and it doesn't look exactly how you want it to look or doesn't sound exactly how you want it to sound, you can make all the changes. Like you can delete episodes, you can create new episodes, you can really up-level your production quality. It's never too late to make those changes. And there's a lot of what I like about podcasting, but it's also one of the things that can be really difficult, is there's a lot of things that you could change. Like there's a lot of different aspects to podcasting. So there's a lot of different buttons that you can play with and see what works and what doesn't work. And yeah, if you're interested to see what we think would work for your podcast, or if you have any questions, then schedule a call with us and we'll talk it through.
Awesome. Thank you. And what was that link?
Cashflowpodcasting.com/chat.
Perfect. And this is fun. Thank you. And thanks for all the wonderful goodness you bring to our clients.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for joining me today. If you're ready to start your podcasting journey to grow your thought leadership and boost your revenue, schedule a call with us at cashflowpodcasting.com/chat. Don't wait to take your business to the next level. I'm Pete Makaitis, and until next time.